Hello, hello. Check 1 2 1 2. Testing, 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 testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Test, test. Testing 1 2 1 2. Test. Testing. Nothing. Testing. Testing 1 2 3.
One more? Maybe a serial last that was possible.
Yeah, and I think I see what was wrong with the speech. So.
Yeah, I think
line in red at the end.
I saw that one. Yeah, I think it's fine. We take. Do you what do you reckon? Take the red black folder off. Keep it on.
Keep it on. Well, let me have a look.
Keep on. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Welcome all to Policy Exchange. We love to be at the heart of national debate, and that's why we welcome this opportunity almost spontaneously to welcome the Leader of the Opposition today. As it's been one of the axioms of our political and historical analysis over the past 100 years that our national life has been becoming more secular, and that with the sole exception of the troubles from the late 1960s in Northern Ireland, religion was playing a less important part in British life. In recent times, however, this analysis has come under a degree of question. Most obviously, in recent years, the events in Leicester, the aspects of the events of 2024, the Gorton by-election last week, and now, perhaps most obviously, in terms of some of the responses to the recent military action in Iran. And so that's why today's event is so timely. Leader of the Opposition, always welcome here. The sense of fullness and excitement in the room is obvious to everyone, and she'll give her keynote address and then open the floor up to questions. So thank you, Kemi. Look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Dean, thank you so much for giving me yet another opportunity to speak at Policy Exchange. I'm afraid this is going to be one of my longest speeches because I have quite a lot to say. Last night, after more than 24 hours of obfuscation, Keir Starmer finally agreed to support the US and Israel's actions in Iran. Canada and Australia had already backed our allies on Saturday, but until last night, Keir Starmer still couldn't tell the British people where our country stood, or even whether the UK would allow the use of our air bases. It took Iranian missiles hitting allies in the Middle East and threatening tens of thousands of British nationals across the Gulf before the Prime Minister finally climbed off the fence. Iran's regime has funded international terrorism, attacked British nationals, brutally repressed its own citizens, and continues to try to develop a nuclear weapon. And yet, even this morning, the Foreign Secretary still can't say if the Labour government supports action against Iran. People in Britain will be wondering why our country's response has been so weak. The official explanation for the hesitancy is international law, but this is a fig leaf. The real explanation is not legal, it is political. Across the UK, there are groups whose political loyalties, when it comes to conflicts in the Middle East, do not align with British national interest. These are people who Labour see as their voters because without them, they cannot stay in power. This isn't international law or principle. It's pure partisan political calculation from a Labour Party that has surrendered its right to govern our country, and it is the reality of decades of failed integration policy. Britain's interests, both economically and militarily, are being put under threat by rising separatism in this country. A separatism that we saw on full display in the by-election last week. I want to talk today about the real lesson from Gorton and Denton. Much of the commentary in the days since has fixated on this issue of family voting. Yes, our voting laws must be upheld, but I do not believe that all those women marched into polling booths to stop them from voting for reform, and they were asked to vote Hannah Spencer because that was not what they wanted to do. I'm afraid that they didn't want to vote Conservative either, just as they haven't for 80 years. By fixating on family voting, we risk learning the wrong lesson from this by-election, just as we did in Batley and Spen in 2021. Something else is happening, something much deeper and much more disturbing. What those by-elections had in common was campaigning designed to mobilize voters on ethnicity and religion, not domestic priorities. People were voting not based on who would increase their wages or fix their schools, but on who would protect the interests of their identity groups and punish those who they disagree with. This is not healthy, and it is not British. It is appalling that separatist campaigning was carried out in Urdu by the Green Party. Campaigning with different messages in a foreign language is a deliberate ploy to exclude those who do not speak that language. It is not in the service of integration. It is about cynically driving a wedge between groups to make it easier to harvest ethnic votes. And the rise of separatism in Britain is making it easier for this style of campaigning to work. Some people don't think separatism is a problem. Others are scared to talk about it. They worry about looking divisive. I say to those people, we must tackle this. We need to be bold and we need to be brave. But we also need to do it with the right tone. Anyone can throw a match and walk away. But the point of this is not to divide or even provoke. It's the opposite. It is about bringing people in Britain together around a common culture and a common identity. There is a vacuum of competence on this issue right now, and that is why conservatives have to lead. No one else can or will do this properly. We have to. My speech today is an answer to a complex question. Why are we seeing more separatism? And why have previous solutions not worked? And how do we fix it? Separatism is on the rise in our country because for too long, Britain has been complacent about our culture and too tolerant of those weaponizing identity politics for their own gain. And I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about here. It is separatism, not sectarianism. Separatism is a way of living that keeps a group apart from the wider society. People who say we live here, but we don't join in. People who see Britain as a place to use, not a country to belong to. This is what I mean when I say our country is our home. It is not a hotel. Sectarianism is a symptom of separatism. It's the politics that follows when people are taught to think as blocks. Vote for us because you are one of us. Previous governments have failed to deal with sectarianism because they did not address its root cause, separatism. And the consequences of these failures are clear. The rape gang scandal is the ugliest example. Abuse of children on an industrial scale. Criminals left unchallenged for decades because authorities feared being called racist or losing votes more than they feared failing victims. A lot of political attention in recent years has been focused on immigration or Islamist extremism. Both matter. But if you don't deal with the separatism that allows extremism to grow, then you don't address its root cause. Extremists thrive where separatism has already done the groundwork, where dissenters have nowhere outside of their community to turn. And separatism is most visible in some Muslim communities, with Islamist extremism its most violent expression. But we are also seeing a rise of separatism in other communities. Intimidation tactics in our politics, attacks like the one we saw on the Indian High Commission in London in March 2023 by Sikh separatists. A lot of diaspora politics in Britain is just imported conflict, and when overseas grievances are imported, they produce separatist activism here. The reason our frameworks for dealing with extremism and terrorism have often failed is because they are not dealing with separatism or the failure of integration. Not enough work has been done around a positive, constructive alternative for people living in close communities who have little option but to agree with or defend the status quo. That is what I want to fix. I was struck by the results of a focus group of Muslim voters published last week. It showed that many of them don't see a positive case for integration and, in fact, see separatism as normal. One of them described the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, as forgetting where she came from. This shows the scale of opposition that many minorities face when they do the right thing and try to join the mainstream. If a Home Secretary is being spoken of like that, imagine what the kids are having to deal with. We need to provide a framework that protects them and backs them up. And the most important question we must ask is who is really losing from this? The biggest victims are the people who are trapped inside separatism. Children growing up here in England, but fenced off from the full life of this country. Women blocked from work, from independence, from building a life of their own. Girls treated as adults far too young, with rules of modesty imposed on their clothing, even in their school uniforms. Then they're treated like children when they are pressured into marriages they did not choose, sometimes to someone they've never met, sometimes even from another country, because that's the dumb thing. This is the reality that Labour and the Green Party and others who pander to separatism pretend not to see. They call it community, I call it coercion. Then there are the victims who should have been protected, like during the rape gang scandal. Victims like the teacher who was forced to go into hiding after showing a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad in a lesson. Increasingly, the victims are Jews. They are threatened, attacked, their homes and businesses vandalized, their restaurants, even their primary schools needing security guards. 2 Jewish worshippers murdered at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester during Yom Kippur. Just last month in Brighton and in Sheffield, activists went door to door urging boycotts of Israeli goods. Let's be honest about what that is. A political movement turning up on your doorstep, demanding that you prove that you're on the right side and recording those who do not comply. This is intimidation, pure and simple. And what did the local Green MP have to say about it? She said that the campaigners were well-intentioned. This is normalizing the targeting of Jews. It is normalizing the targeting of Jews in their own neighborhoods just to pick up votes. Shameful. And no other party seems to care about this except Conservatives. We care because we believe in a united country, a Britain that feels recognizable wherever you are, not just a collection of tribes. I have long argued that while Britain is a multiracial country, we must not be a multicultural one. And some people think this is a controversial position because they do not understand what culture is. Culture is not your skin color. It's not just the food you eat or the clothes you wear for a festival. Culture is much deeper than that. It is behaviors, it is norms, it is expectations. Expectations about the role of women, about children and the freedoms they're allowed as they grow. It is attitudes to authority, who gets which jobs and how. It's concepts of fairness, notions of tolerance, free speech, and definitions of what is sacred. That is what culture is. We must tackle this ludicrous idea that culture means something that comes from somewhere else, which leads to children being sent home for wearing Union Jack outfits as their choice on Culture Day, basically telling those children that there is no such thing as English or British culture and the only good things about our country are imported. This is rubbish. I understand. I understand what culture is because I grew up in a genuinely multicultural society where everyone looked the same, yet norms, behaviors, languages, even ways of practicing the same religion were quite different. British culture exists. We live in it, we benefit from it, and we have a duty to defend it and pass it on. The answer to this is integration. But for integration to work, people have to know what they're integrating into. A culture which is strong and self-confident. It does not work if Britain is a mess of competing cultures, and it cannot work if we are not brave enough to say who we are and what we expect. Integration can only work when people come in at a pace and in numbers that can be easily absorbed. That is why last year we toughened up our immigration policy. And let me be honest, I don't even think integration is the real objective. Assimilation is. This should be common sense. If you join a country, you join the country. You don't create your own separate thing. Tolerance is an important part of any decent society. But tolerating minority communities doesn't mean that we want people living in tribes. What we want is assimilation. One society with shared norms under the same laws. Instead of asking newcomers to join our way of life, too many people in authority decided integration was a two-way street. This is what creates the space for separatism, with endless arguments about halal meat and whether or not we should ban burqas. The fact is, if authorities cannot enforce the law on family voting in Gorton, I can assure you they're not going to be ripping burqas off women's faces or putting them in prison. Banning burqas in France has not improved integration. I want to see the end of women covering their faces in this country. And what I'm talking about today will show us how we do it. Once upon a time, we talked about British values of tolerance and live and let live, muscular liberalism. Over the years, this has drifted into something weaker, tolerance without confidence and principles without enforcement. I am afraid that muscular liberalism is no longer enough. We must never undersell the value of liberty and freedom. They are necessary for our society to flourish. However, freedom without clarity on boundaries or clarity on what needed protecting bred a slow normalization of separatism. It resulted in double standards and parallel norms until the country started to feel like it was running a two-tier system with different rules for different people. What we need is muscular conservatism. Muscular conservatism starts from a simple truth. We don't want to throw away any of the things that are good about our society. We want to keep them, defend them, and pass them on. That means having the courage to set boundaries. It means being willing to enforce standards and not be embarrassed by doing so. That is what muscular conservatism looks like in practice. We conserve. We keep the things that make this country work: the rule of law, equal citizenship, free speech, personal responsibility. We draw limits to protect what we cherish. For many years, I cherished the fact that this was a country where anti-Semitism was rare. But because of our tolerance of attitudes that don't align with British values, we have lost this. In theory, this country still believes in free speech. But without enforcing limits and equal standards, equal rights, we ended up tolerating marches that were intimidating Jews across our cities. And for too long, integration has been managerial more than moral. And let me tell you what I mean by that. It's when governments announce strategies, a new strategy, a new consultation, more grants for community projects, but there's no real willingness to say what the newcomers are joining or what the civic norms actually are. Muscular conservatism is the end of that drift. We are not just a collection of individuals doing whatever we like until someone complains. We are more than that. A society is a set of shared norms enforced fairly, passed on deliberately. And this requires clear principles, a clear diagnosis, and the nerve to act. It means refusing to be cowed into silence. And it means delivery, relentless, practical delivery of a plan. So today, I'm announcing our plans to deal with separatism, culture, and integration. It starts with a new Cultural and Integration Commission, who I am tasking with preparing an interim report by the time of our party conference in October. From that, we will create an integration and cohesion plan that sets out the culture that we want people to assimilate into, what we expect and what we will enforce. But first, we must do away with what has failed. Integration being treated as an administrative process has not worked. That era is over. We will act on a simple doctrine. 1, we will end identity politics in the state, full stop. No racial preferences. Protected characteristics will not be used as criteria for hiring, promotion, admissions, or procurement. There will be no more. There will be no more state-sponsored division. From now on, every public body will act based on merit and competence, not grievance and quotas. I will ask the Commission to investigate how we ensure that integration is a duty where Britain sets the terms. Newcomers should join our country, not try to change it. And we will back the people who enforce those standards. School leaders, police officers, NHS staff, employers, the people who are currently left to take the risk on their own. That is not fair. They need us, and we are going to show up for them. That was the first thing. The second is universalism. That is one set of rules for everyone, enforced fairly and visibly. No more two-tier. Our institutions will model those terms and enforce them. Universalism will run through every aspect of government policy, from education to policing, welfare to immigration. We will review every single code of practice to ensure standardization across public bodies and prevent them from doing their own thing. And this strand of work will be carried out by the Shadow Cabinet Office team. 3. We will replace the promotion of multiculturalism in schools with a national story and civic confidence. Our curriculum should tell a coherent national story, one that is inclusive of the many people who have come to Britain, but without the grievance or the guilt which is corroding our cultural confidence. We will not teach our children that all cultures are equal. Instead, we will teach them why Britain's civic culture matters. I have already commissioned Professor Robert Toombs and Baroness Amanda Spielman to begin the work with the Shadow Education team. We will protect free speech and back people who uphold common standards. That is necessary. That is the fourth principle. Teachers, lecturers, public servants, and employers must be able to state basic facts, teach a coherent national story, and uphold standards without being intimidated into silence, as we saw in Batley. We let that teacher down. Never again. A free society cannot be run by whoever is most aggressive, violent, shouts loudest, or pushes hardest. So we will end the institutional self-censorship that stops people from doing the right thing. And I have asked Lord Toby Young to lead a review of this work. The fifth thing is that I will ask the Commission to work out how we can fundamentally overhaul the Equality Act so that it prioritises meritocracy and strengthens integration. It would look at how we can introduce a meritocracy test so that we make sure that anti-discrimination is not used as a mechanism to undermine meritocracy, and to align incentives so that integration and assimilation become the path of least resistance. And this work will be led by Claire Coutinho. Alongside this, I'm commissioning work on Islamist extremism and how it feeds on separatism, so that we tackle both the ideology and the conditions that let it grow. This is being led by Shadow Cabinet Ministers Chris Philp and Nick Timothy, and they will be supported by former prison governor Ian Aitchison. This is a lot of work that we are announcing, and it is just the beginning. Because this is not just about culture. It is about growth, trust, and the cost of running a country. So there will be an economic thread running throughout this work, because integration affects our economic growth. The fact is, assimilated migrants contribute more, and barriers to participation in society mirror barriers to participation in the workplace. They are barriers to lifetime earnings, barriers to tax contributions. We cannot fix integration without breaking cycles of dependency where communities become net recipients generation after generation. Integration and social cohesion are not a nice to have. They are part of our economic infrastructure. In a high-trust society, business is easier, investment is safer, and growth comes faster. In a low-trust society, everything costs more. Regulation, monitoring, litigation, the sheer friction. We are paying a trust tax. Separatism is a trust tax. Integration is part of our plan to get Britain working again. The old way of doing things no longer works. That is why we need something new, and only the Conservatives can provide this. We are a new party now, with a new leader, and I have had an entire lifetime to think about this. I have lived the alternative. I grew up in a society where people looked the same but lived by different rules, and I left it behind for a reason. I chose Britain because it is a country where the law is applied equally, whether you're a prince or a pauper. It is a country where merit matters, not who your parents are, and where you can build a life without asking permission from gatekeepers. We are a multiracial country, proudly so. That is the real legacy of empire. But a multiracial country only works if we are honest about what holds us together and if we are serious about defending it. And yes, this means saying something unfashionable. Identity politics is a dead end, whether it comes from the left or the right. If you want politics that is organized around grievance and group pressure, there are plenty of other parties offering that. But we can see where that leads today, with a Prime Minister too scared to say anything or take action to defend our country until after we are attacked. If you want a country that holds together, there is only one party that is offering that, the Conservatives. And as long as I'm leading this party, we will do the hard work. We will defend the rules that make Britain fair. We will back the people who enforce standards. We will restore confidence in our institutions and pride in our country. We will fix what is broken and preserve the beliefs and the values which put the great into Great Britain. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm afraid I'm only going to be able to take a few questions from the media today because I have to go back to the House to prepare for the Prime Minister's statements. Looking forward to hearing what he has to say. But the first question is from Ian Watson of the BBC.
Obviously, there's a lot in the speech, but let me go back to the beginning of it when you were talking about Iran. More generally, is it your position that you would back political assassinations in order to bring about regime change, even if you were told this was against international law? And secondly, today the government is limiting the amount of time refugees can stay in the country. There's going to be a temporary status. In your view, does that help or hinder integration?
Right. So on the first point, we need to act in the British national interest. That is what politicians are elected to do. We are elected to make sure that we preserve the security and safety of citizens in this country. Iran is a threat to Britain, and we should do everything within our power to make sure that it is no longer a threat. The US was carrying out actions in its national interest. Our government couldn't say whether or not it agreed or disagreed with what was going on. And let's be clear, international law is a fig leaf. It is not a coincidence that Canada and Australia, other allies led by left-wing governments, were able to say what they believed, that they agreed with the actions, and our Prime Minister was wringing his hands. That shows that this has got nothing to do with international law and everything to do with votes and where the Labour Party thinks its vote comes from. We are not going to be deciding votes based on the colour of people's skin, their ethnicity or religion. In our view, the colour of your skin should be no more important than the colour of your hair or your eyes. We want a united country, and we want to see action taken in the British national interest. On your second point about the temporary status, I think Shabana Mahmood is trying to do some very difficult things. It is quite clear that the status of refugees now is something which is changing from how the laws were intended when they were first put in. We're taking in many more people from many more places around the world when things like the Refugee Convention were written in the aftermath of the Second World War. I think we do need to update our laws to make sure they are in line with reality today as opposed to reality from many years ago. Where the government does things that are right, we will support them. Where they do things that are wrong, we will show the right way. I think that Shabana Mahmood is doing something against the wishes of many people in her party. I think she is attacked, like I said in that focus group, by people who believe that she should be focusing on separatism and representing her religion more than representing the country. There is a lot more that she needs to do on immigration and asylum. We have tougher policies. But what I'm not going to do is criticise someone who is actually taking some tough decisions against the interests of her backbenchers. Next question, Amanda Acass from Sky.
Hello, Amanda Acass, Sky News. When the US and Israel launched their attacks on Iran, they hadn't made an effort to seek UN Security Council approval, and a negotiation process was ongoing. In your speech, you talked about international law being a fig leaf, but also praised the UK as somewhere where law was equally applied. Has the Conservative Party completely given up on the principle of international law and the international rules-based order?
I think we need to be very clear about what international law is. These are agreements made between countries. They are not the same as domestic law, where you have votes, democracy, courts, and a system to enforce them. So we should stop drawing false equivalence between international law and domestic law. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. We can have, I'm not a lawyer, we can have many different arguments about whether things were compliant or not compliant with international law. But you have to ask yourself, when international law is stopping the good guys and helping the bad guys, is it something we want to keep? If international law is helping the ayatollahs brutalize their regimes and stopping us from doing anything, then perhaps it needs to be looked at again. What we are talking about in the Conservative Party today is common sense. Is this common sense? Not, well, it's written on a piece of paper, so we have to do it, even though it's stupid. And a lot of people are unable to tell the difference. We can, and we're going to be showing the others how to do that. Harry Horton, ITV.
Thank you very much. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that he'd learnt the lessons of the war in Iraq. What would you say to people who hear what you say and your support for the US and say that you haven't learnt the lessons of Iraq and believe that you're too keen to get involved and support a US war that some say has no clear end goal or clear objective?
Right. So I think that people need to be very specific about what lessons they are talking about. The lesson in Iraq was make sure you have the evidence first. In Iran, it is very, very clear what is going on. This was a regime that launched attacks on Israel on October 7th. We saw it very clearly with our own eyes, video evidence. This is a regime that was supporting the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and has been attacking all sorts of ships in seas, things that our economy depend on, like shipping lanes. Our economy is very, very dependent on oil. All of these things are in our national interest. Iran in 2026 is not Iraq in 2003. And it is quite clear that many of the people who are talking about learning lessons aren't actually being specific about what those lessons are. The lessons are to make sure that we are ready, we are able, and that there is evidence. I believe that all of those things were in place for this. We need to make sure that we do not put our country in danger. Yes, of course. I do not want to see a situation where we are sending British troops, people's sons and daughters, to war when we're not clear what is going on. With Iran, it is very, very clear what is going on. And we can't just bury our heads in the sand like ostriches and hope that if we just do nothing, the problem will go away. I do not want to see an Iran that has nukes, because if they do have nukes, we will be nuked. That is very, very clear. That is what we need to explain to many people who may not understand the specifics of this situation or the details. We need to be honest about that. Keir Starmer does not know what he believes. I know what I believe, and I'm able to say so. Final question. Chris Hope, GB News.
Thank you. Chris Hope, GB News. To be very, very clear then, you think that this government's multiculturalism issues here meant that the government was too slow in allowing US jets to use UK bases to bomb Iran? And at what point should MPs get a say over what's happening in Iran in the UK Parliament?
I think it's much more complicated than that. I think that over decades, Labour has come to see ethnic bloc voting as something that helps it get into power. And so it hasn't questioned it. And we now have a new generation of Labour MPs who, quite frankly, believe that they would not be there unless they pander to some of the requests from those groups. I was astonished to hear that Gaza had been mentioned between July 2024 and May 2025 over 9,000 times by Labour MPs. More than immigration, more than the NHS, more than poverty. This is what they talk about again and again. We have Labour politicians arguing for airports to be built in Mirpur instead of talking about where the airports in this country should be built. This is a problem. They have spent too long doing this, and now another party has learned how to do it, is copying it, and is taking votes off them, and they're panicking. So I do think that a lot of the pressure that Labour MPs put around war also comes from pressure that they are receiving from their constituents who are separate from the rest of society. That is why we want to start dealing with the root cause. Let's talk about the separatism. Let's start there, and then we'll be able to fix things. Thank you. So what was the...
When should MPs ever get a vote on what's happening in Iran?
I think it depends. I don't think we needed a vote on this. And quite frankly, given that this is the most left-wing parliament with a lot of extremely silly people sitting there, I do actually worry about allowing people like Zara Sultana and so on to be voting on serious issues of national security. There is a place for MPs to vote. There is a place for that. But sometimes when things are moving quickly, we can't spend time with lots of people giving speeches written by ChatGPT about stuff that they don't know about. Let's focus on what matters. British national security is what matters. We want a united country. We are the Conservative and Unionist Party. This is not just about the separatism that we see in certain minority communities. This goes to even the nationalism that we're seeing with the SNP and Plaid. All of these things are getting worse and worse. We're seeing so much more of a trend with multi-party politics. Conservative Party wants to bring everyone together, and we're going to be working on this Cultural and Integration Commission to make sure that we have some actual answers that will work when we get back into government, because we will need a plan. Thank you.